Dr. Klaper, nice to be with you.
And excellent to be with you, my friend. Thank you for doing this remarkable presentation.
Of course, this is one that we put online a while ago. We were a little rushed, so we wanted to be able to take some time and go through it, delve into some of the slides. Often, you and I are thinking about the plant-based nutrition from a clinical standpoint. We're looking at the mechanisms of disease. This is going to get a little more philosophical. We will see how the notions of plant-based eating, vegetarianism, veganism, have really been in motion for millennia. They're not new. They're not only due to the environmental constraints and the factory farming today. Some of these issues have been around for a very long time. So it gives us perspective to learn about the advocates from days of lore.
So here's Pythagoras at 570 BCE saying something very clear and graphic. As long as man continues to be the ruthless destroyer of lower living beings, he will never know health or peace. For as long as men massacre animals, they will kill each other.
So Pythagoras was a Greek philosopher and proto-physicist, and he inspired many of the thinkers that followed him that we cite in this presentation.
We have to remember that, well, people have been people forever, and they've been eating forever, and they learned about domesticating animals in our ancient past, and so there was an abundance of cows and sheep and pigs and chickens at every market. And because of the taste of flesh that people had developed, the appetite for it, every marketplace was a place of slaughter. There was just blood running on the ground, and no matter what animal you would like, sir, yep, we'll fix it right up for you, and out comes the knife, and the animal is slaughtered. But in those moments before the slaughter happens, there is terror in the eyes and the heart and the screams of the calves and the sheep and the pigs. It's hard to kill a pig, and so Pythagoras, as he walks through the market, sees this, and he rightfully says that for as long as men massacre animals, marketplaces are places of massacre of animals. And then he makes that connection to see a knife driven into the throat of a calf or a pig. You don't have to use much imagination because of all the wars that were happening around to see in your memory of the knife being driven into the chest or the throat, or the spear being driven into the abdomen of a fellow human being. And that same steeling of the heart that the butcher must don, like a garment to do that act, is the same garment that the soldier must don in his heart, that same armor, to thrust that spear into a fellow human being. And so he rightfully says, for as long as men massacre animals, they will kill each other. That same armoring of the heart happens both in the marketplace and on the battlefield. And he saw it very clearly and was trying to liberate us from both scenes. Stop the killing of the animals, stop the killing of each other. And so he still is calling out to us across the ages about the danger, that mortal danger to us as feeling human beings, to armor our hearts to do that act of killing. And he pleads for us to put that armor down.
Socrates, in Plato's Republic, he documents conversations between Socrates, his teacher, and some friends, right, around Athens. So this one is with Glaucon.
Would this habit of eating animals not require that we slaughter animals that we knew as individuals and in whose eyes we could gaze and see ourselves reflected? only a few hours before we eat our meal.
This habit would require that of us.
Wouldn't this knowledge of our role in turning a being into a thing hinder us in achieving happiness?
It could so hinder us in our quest for happiness.
And if we pursue this way of living, have we not have need to visit the doctor more often?
We would have such need.
If we pursue our habit of eating animals, and if our neighbors follow a similar path, will we not have need to go to war against our neighbor to secure greater pasturage? Because ours will not be enough to sustain us, and our neighbor will have a similar need to wage war on us for the same reason?
We would be so compelled.
Would not these facts prevent us from achieving happiness, and therefore the conditions necessary to the building of a just society if we pursue a desire to eat animals?
Yes, they would so prevent us. Not only does he talk about achieving happiness and just society, but he's talking about several of the issues that we consider to be only contemporary ones. He's talking about the encroachment of land, higher resource needs for land. He's talking about visiting the doctor more often if we pursue this way of living. In other words, eating animal products. I'm just amazed that they knew 2,000 years ago some of the things that a lot of the professionals in Dr. Klaper's generation still don't really think about too often.
Absolutely. Let's hear it for Socrates, who made this connection between eating animal products and, clogging the arteries, gout, whatever diseases, come from an animal-based diet. They saw those diseases and made that connection. So bravo for them. And this echoes our modern day predicament of the necessity for ever greater sources of energy in modern day. We need fossil fuels to run our cars, and versus where you're going to put the windmills for energy. Back then, it was the amount of pasturage, amount of land with grass on it, where you can graze ever more cows and sheep that you can slaughter for their meat. And so back then, the prize, as opposed to fossil fuels and windmills, back then it was green acres of green grass, and you'll kill your neighbor to take his acres of green grass, and you covet that, you hunger for their possessions of those areas of land, and this seemed to be a driving force behind so many of the local battles that would take place that got people used to slaughtering other human beings for their need to grow more animals to slaughter them.
So, of course, one difference today is that the vast majority of these cattle are not eating grass because we've invented a way to feed them grain, which is not their natural subsistence. Creates disease in the animals we're raising on a massive scale, and marbles their flesh. So the reason we do grain-fed beef, for instance, is because it facilitates the deposition of fat in the muscle of the cows. And so then you have the marbled steaks that meet consumer expectations. It's not natural for the cow. Obviously, it's not natural for the human consumer. And those are the people who end up seeking our medical advice for atherosclerosis and angina because their coronary vessels are not adequately supplying the blood to the heart. See, it's hard not to get back to medicine sometimes. Seneca is one of the better known skeptics. And with thoughts like this that you'll see soon, he became vegetarian, but he was living in Rome when it was not politic to be vegetarian. It was sort of like today you could be considered at that time, when the early Christians were mostly vegetarian, he didn't want to be likened to a Christian in Rome at that moment. And so he went back from being a vegetarian for a sort of political convenience. But he had these sentiments in mind, and he says, quote, "I now turn to you, whose insatiable and unfathomable gluttony searches every land and every sea. Some animals it persecutes with snares and traps, with hunting nets, with hooks, sparing no sort of toil to obtain them. Excepting from mere caprice or daintiness, there is no peace allowed to any species of beings. Yet how much of all these feasts which you obtain by the agency of innumerable hands do you even so much as touch with your lips, satiated as they are with luxuries? How much of that animal, which has been caught with so much expense or peril, does the dyspeptic and bilious owner taste? Unhappy even in this, that you perceive not that you hunger more than your belly."
Wow. He is very perceptive. Even he foreshadows today's animal production enterprise, where the meat is wrapped up in cellophane in the meat case in the counter. You have zero connection with the animal. Even though the people are working in these dreadful conditions in the slaughterhouses, you never see that, you never think about it. You take the meat home, you cook it, and in 10 minutes you've swallowed it, it's done. And now the meat is not done with you, and he rightfully says the dyspeptic and bilious owner of the taste sensation. How much of that animal do you actually taste? Now, you don't really understand the nature of the animal you're eating, and you wind up dyspeptic and bilious. Even then he makes the connection, and this is very profound, and it foreshadows our modern connection with animals and eating their parts, which is all we do these days. We don't actually eat the animals. We don't actually look that calf or that cow in the eye. And so he was bemoaning, decrying that disconnection even back then.
And also commenting on the gluttony and the greed, which plagued human beings, I guess, since antiquity. And it's something that we can and we must overcome. Otherwise, we have too much disparity and misery. He also says, so how much of these feasts do you even touch with your lips? So in addition to Dr. Klaper's interpretation, which I think is valid, you could also read it like, how much are you even getting? So more literally, right? So you're wasting food. It's inherently inefficient. How much are you even eating? Or did you have so many appetizers that you're not going to get to that roast on the feast table, and it's just going to be spoiled or wasted, which also foreshadows the dynamic today where my understanding is in the US, 40% of food is wasted. 40% of food produced at so much cost and so much violence in the case of animal agriculture is not consumed. Because at different levels of production, including at the consumer level, what's left in our fridge and what gets kind of tossed at the end of the week, we waste 40% of all that food. That's tremendous.
It winds up in the dumpster out behind the supermarket. It winds up in your garbage that that you wind up taking out to the alley for the truck to come by and take it away. What an ultimate crime, sin, depending on how dark you want to label the enterprise there. I'll just label it, what a tragedy that is, to waste the food at such a terrible cost.
I wanted to bring to our attention Abul Ara al-Mari, who is a Syrian philosopher, right around 1000, the year 1000. And he was always critical of religious and other cultural dogma. He was also vegan. And this is 1,000 years ago. Listen to what he says. Dr. Klaper, would you mind?
Do not unjustly eat fish the water has given up. and do not desire as food the flesh of slaughtered animals, or the white milk of mothers, who intended its pure draught for their young, not noble ladies, the calves, of course. And do not grieve the unsuspecting birds by taking eggs, for injustice is the worst of crimes. And spare the honey which the bees get industriously from the flowers of fragrant plants, for they did not store it that it might belong to others.
What do you think?
What an eloquent plea. And he's almost the attorney for the animal side here. And he's trying to bring these animals to life and make clear the natural law that is being violated here. The milk of newly of mother goats, mother cows who've recently given birth. Don't take their milk. It's not. It's for their young, not for noble ladies. And the hen who is who is incubating her eggs, and as you reach under her to take her eggs out, she pecks you because she wants to lay those eggs because her maternal instincts are there. And he's saying injustice is the worst of crimes. To take these babies from her even before they've hatched, that is the worst of crime. And he's so sensitive that even the bees, he knows those bees are making that honey not for us, not for our tea and our desserts. That's their winter food supply, and they are industriously making it from the flowers of fragrant plants. They did not store it that it might belong to others. He sees the truth of natural law. He sees the natural world and its flow, and how much man it violates that natural flow, and it's an eloquent plea to respect the natural framework of reproduction here. And so I really applaud this man, and how I wish people had really heard his words and acted upon them. Touches my heart.
It takes some wisdom, right, to look through the thicket of culture, whether it was 1,000 years ago or today, where eating these foods is normalized, and to ask the question, is this normal? Is this appropriate? But when you give it just a little bit of thought and you're willing to look behind the curtain, you find that pretty quickly the answer. There's no justification for eating the products of other animals. If we are to be decent, decent people, right? If we're basically to practice our values more consistently, so we're good to our families and to our friends. If we shared an ounce of that compassion for other beings, then we would eat accordingly. So Moses Maimonides.
Maimonides.
Thank you. He was a Jewish philosopher in medieval Spain. He says there's no difference between the pain of humans and the pain of other living beings, since the love and tenderness of the mother for the young are not produced by reasoning, but by feeling. And this faculty exists not only in humans, but in most living beings.
Oh, that is so profound, because in my personal memory, the echoes I have in my mind of the bellowing of the mother cow when my uncle would take away their calf. She's just given birth. He comes in on the next morning, takes away her calf, puts it in the veal pen 10 yards away in the barn, and this mother cow bellows. Hour after hour and day after day, it goes on, night and day, the most heart-rending, soul-tearing bellowing to be able to be in contact with her newborn. which is nearby, to nuzzle it and lick it and to be the mother that she is. Here's Maimonides saying, there is no difference between the pain of humans and the pain of other living beings, since the love and tenderness of the mother for the young are not produced by reasoning, but by feeling. And this faculty exists not only in humans, but in most living beings. How right he was. He saw it so clearly and powerfully. He heard those same bellows, without question, and knew exactly. You don't need any interpreter to understand what those bellows mean. The animals talking to us, they are talking that loud and clear. And it touches our hearts. And he wants us to open to the truth of that sound and the pain behind it. And thank you, Moses Maimonides, for reminding us of this universal truth that all living beings have sentience and therefore have connection with their newborns.
Indeed, and also this point about how it doesn't have to be reasoning but feeling. So you don't have to have this advanced Homo sapiens frontal lobe to know what's coming in the slaughterhouse or in the feedlot. If you have a limbic system, which is the sort of primordial center of fear and panic, then you can suffer when you're on a factory farm, and it's apparent that that's what's going on. You don't need to be able to intellectualize as a cow or a pig. Well, this doesn't seem good because I think they're going to line me up tomorrow and we're going to travel to slaughter. As long as you have the stress hormones and the panic, and you can smell the blood of your comrades, you are prone to stress, pain, and anxiety, which is the existence of the animals produced for food today. The animals we eat are not well. They're not well mentally or physically. And we have to wonder what that does to the human consumer, eating animals who are not healthy by any measure.
That's such a valid point you raised, Dr. Burns. The arrogance of man who puts animals on a lower level. Well, they don't have language. They can't do mathematics. They're somehow lower creatures. Therefore, it's okay to slaughter them. The arrogance of that stance that allows us to totally ignore the feelings and the language that these animals express in times of distress, as you mentioned, is stunning and responsible for so much suffering, animal and human.
So Leonardo da Vinci is known to have been a vegetarian, and he's clearly upset by the state of affairs in his era. And I wonder, did his indignance, which we'll see here, motivate any of his creativity? Did it open his mind and allow him to produce what he did? So he says, "King of the animals, as thou hast described him. I should rather say king of the beasts, thou being the greatest, because thou dost only help them, in order that they give thee their children for the benefit of the gullet, of which thou has attempted to make a sepulchre for all animals. And I would say still more if I were allowed to speak the entire truth."
Well, he calls us out. King of the animals, as thou hast described him. I should rather say king of beasts, thou being the greatest, because thou dost only help them in order that they give thee their children for the benefit of the gullet, so you can swallow them down, of which you've attempted to make a tomb for all animals. And I would say still more if I were allowed to speak the entire truth. Even then, he knew you can't say, this is such an inflammatory statement to make, but it's still the truth of it. And he says, if I were allowed to speak the entire truth. And indeed, we hold ourselves as the king of the animals. The truth is we're the king of beasts for what we do to the other animals. And he saw it, and he's calling us out on it. And we thank him for his clarity and his courage.
And he also notices the instrumental value that we ascribe to animals, right? As opposed to their intrinsic value. He said, you only help them so that they give their children for the benefit of your goal, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't deal with animals at all. There would be no assistance, no feeding or watering. It's solely for the purpose of ultimately consuming them, and that was important to notice at the time.
Sir Thomas More, slaughtering our fellow creatures gradually destroys the sense of compassion, which is the finest sentiment of which our human nature is capable. How true that is. The butcher who kills animals, cuts the throat hour after hour of cows and calves and pigs and goats and kids. Surely their heart hardens to that act of killing. And as we've talked before, it doesn't take much once that flame of compassion is extinguished to sign up for the army, where you can thrust a spear or a sword into the heart and chest of a fellow human, because that sense of compassion has been extinguished. And he rightfully says compassion is the highest sentiment that human beings are capable of, to care for each other, to care for your children, of course, care for your neighbor. We have compassion then. We even can have compassion for starving people, though that's been tested today for sure. But to see other people starving awakens that sense of compassion. It is our highest sentiment. And yet killing animals and eating them, if we went to a slaughterhouse and saw the truth of how our meat is produced, it would hopefully awaken our sense of compassion, but maybe it extinguishes it if we just work in a slaughterhouse hour after hour. So again, eating meat and losing our compassion are intimately connected, and here's a plea not to lose our sense of compassion.
Okay, so Michel de Montaigne was a French statesman and writer back in the 1500s, and this is an excerpt from his influential compilation called The Essays. Dr. Klaper?
There is, nevertheless, a certain respect, a general duty to humanity, not only to beasts that have life and sense, but even to trees and plants. We owe justice to men and graciousness and benignity to other creatures. There is a certain commerce and mutual obligation between them and us.
So Thomas Moffat, around the same time, was an English physician, and he was part of this early hygienic tradition. This is from his book called Health's Improvement. He says, "Can civil and human eyes yet abide the slaughter of an innocent beast, the cutting of his throat, the smashing him on the head, the flaying off his skin, the quartering and dismembering of his joints, the sprinkling of his blood, the ripping up of his veins, the enduring of ill savors, the heaving of heavy sighs, sobs, and groans, the passionate struggling and panting for life, which only hard-hearted butchers can endure to see?"
Philippe Paquette said, "It is incredible how much prejudice has been allowed to operate in favor of meat, while so many facts are opposed to the pretended necessity of its use."
So if you had to guess his profession, could be a few things if he's questioning the necessity of meat consumption. But we will tell you that he was a gastroenterologist before there was a proper subspecialty, but he was a French physician who developed a theory of digestion and found that plant foods were much more readily digestible. George Granville was an English politician and playwright. This is from his poem, The Boar's Defense. So it's from the perspective of a boar. And it's important to explore the perspective of other species in animal ethics. So, Dr. Klaper, take it away.
"You murder us in sport, then dish us up for drunken feast, a relish for the cup. We lengthen not our meals, but you must feast, gorge till your bellies burst. Pray, who's the beast?"
So you can imagine, the upper crust of England watching this play and maybe giggling, but maybe feeling a little uncomfortable from the truth in this stanza. George Shane was a physician in Scotland. He personally struggled with obesity and became vegetarian to combat it. He published the popular essay on health and long life and recommended his patients quit meat and alcohol in favor of vegetables and exercise. Dr. K?
At what time animal food came first in use is not certainly known. He was a bold man who made the first experiment to see the convulsions, agonies, and tortures of a poor fellow creature whom they cannot restore nor recompense, dying to gratify luxury and tickle callous and rank organs, must require a rocky heart and a great degree of cruelty and ferocity. I cannot find any difference between feeding on human flesh and feeding on other animal flesh, except custom and practice.
And if perhaps that seems a stretch, consider, why don't we drink the milk of moose or donkeys or giraffes? It's based on some culture and history, but in the end, it's arbitrary which animal products we consume and which ones we said, no, I would never eat my dog or cat. So something to think about. Voltaire was a French satirist. His vegetarianism was influenced in part by Hindu philosophy. And this quote was part of a critique of vivisection. He's responding to the notion attributed to René Descartes, the French philosopher, that animals are mere machines, completely incapable of feeling.
Answer me, you who believe that animals are only machines. Has nature arranged for this animal to have all the machinery of feelings, only in order for it not to have any at all?
Well said. And our very own Benjamin Franklin. So there's this story about Ben Franklin where he was on a boat, okay, I think going down the Mississippi River, and he currently was doing an experiment in vegetarianism. A fish was caught, and when they're filleting the fish, there was some evidence of smaller fish in its belly. At that point, he had a memorable quote about how humans can rationalize pretty much anything. And so if the fish could eat another fish, then why can't I eat the fish? And he sort of relapsed into eating fish and other animals. But he also had this vegetarian sentiment. He says, hitherto, I had stuck to my resolution of not eating animal food. And on this occasion, I considered the taking every fish as a kind of unprovoked murder, since none of them had or ever could do us any injury that might justify the slaughter.
Indeed, they're fish. They don't jump out of the water and bite us. They're just being fish. They're innocent.
As you often say, Dr. Klaper, perhaps it is time to let the fish off the hook.
Indeed.
Bronson and his daughter, Louisa May Alcott. These guys happen to be from my hometown of Concord, Massachusetts, where there was a literary and philosophical movement called Transcendentalism, where they were starting to question some of the attitudes of the day, and they were thinking more about nature and how to preserve it, and how to prevent overutilization of resources. And so this wise family was, if not fully vegan, vegetarian. I think some in the family were vegan and some weren't. That was pretty abnormal at the time. Okay, so we're going to see how Bronson Alcott thought about this. He was influenced by Pythagoras and by Sylvester Graham, the graham cracker guy. And Alcott and his contemporary Charles Lane started the first known vegan commune called Fruitlands, which was an experiment that lasted, I think, about a year. But that's quite interesting, because I think, Dr. Klaper, you lived in such a place in Central Florida for some time.
Indeed, I did, and it was a place of gentleness and delicious plant-based food, absolutely. In reading this quotation, I'm really struck by the ecological understanding that is inherent in these statements about the reality of raising animals and the exaggerated amount of land and resources they require to put meat on the table. Even then he knew it, and how much better it would be if we were plant-eating people. Here's what they said. It is calculated that if no animal food were consumed, 1/4 of the land now used would suffice for human sustenance. That is, if we just use that land to grow corn and beans and rice and potatoes, we would only need 1/4 of the land needed for, as they say, the extensive tracts of country now appropriated to grazing, mowing, and other modes of animal provision could be cultivated by and for intelligent and affectionate human neighbors. The sty and the stable too often secure more of the farmer's regard than he bestows on the garden and the children. No hope is there for humanity, while woman is withdrawn from the tender assiduities which adorn her and her household to the servitude of the dairy and the flesh pots. They saw it even back then.
So, yeah, I'm so familiar with the term flesh pots, but it sounds like something at the turn of the 20th century was, I don't know what you do in a flesh pot. Is it a stew?
Yes, exactly. It's a pot hanging over the fire and the hearth in the home there, where you're doing slow stewing of the lamb and the beef and the veal and the other animals that are going to be consumed later on in the day or the next.
Now, there's some antiquated, like notions of the woman's role, but he still notices that there's sort of waste. There are different types of waste when we obsess ourselves with animal products. And he's saying that maybe the cook in the household might have better things to do than stir the pot all day and milk the cows and all this stuff. What more could we do if our time was spent more wisely?
Nikola Tesla. There is no doubt that some plant food, such as oatmeal, is more economical than meat and superior to it in regard to both mechanical and mental performance. Such food, moreover, taxes our digestive organs decidedly less, and in making us more contented and sociable, produces an amount of good difficult to estimate. In view of these facts, every effort should be made to stop the wanton and cruel slaughter of animals, which must be destructive to our morals. Well, Herr Tesla certainly saw the truth of plant foods versus animal foods. I wish his rectitude and wisdom that modern day Tesla producers would have incorporated this shining principle as well as the efficient motors that he also designed. I wish his view of animal foods versus plant foods had also been incorporated. And with every modern day Tesla you buy, you get a pamphlet on the importance of eating plant-based foods. It would be a major step forward, I believe.
This guy, along with Thomas Edison, was the father of modern energy. So he spent all day thinking about energy and how to harness it and transmit it efficiently and everything. And of course, he's going to make the connection to the human being. We require energy, and we could either have a good fuel source or one that is really inefficient. And as he said, taxes our digestive organs. So lots of stuff to mull over here.
George Bernard Shaw said it in one sentence: animals are my friends, and I don't eat my friends. He recognizes the sentience and the beauty of animals, and he had his eyes open enough, his heart open enough to recognize that. And he clearly had relationships with chickens and goats and cows. He saw their beauty and their sentience. enough to make friends with them. You can easily make friends with a turkey who will recognize you, and a cow and a calf. And so he said it one sentence: animals are my friends, and I don't eat my friends.
Sometimes people say, "Oh, these vegans they only care about animals." We have a lot of human issues going on. Well, Cesar Chavez was a labor organizer. He's quite interested in making life better for human beings as well. So it's not a zero-sum game.
I met Cesar Chavez. We shared a truck ride up to his conclave up there in Tehachapi. I had dinner with him. What a lovely man! He was older when I met him, but he was at a vegetarian event in Southern California. He was one of the speakers, and one of the people in back at his compound had a health issue. And he said, so I said, I'll come up with you and have a look. And so I got to spend about an hour and a half in his truck driving up to Tehachapi. And what a sweet, beautiful, sincere man he was. I was really taken by him. But here's one I have a personal relationship with. And he said once, Cesar Chavez, we need in a special way to work twice as hard to help people understand that the animals are fellow creatures, that we must protect them and love them as we love ourselves.
Coretta King, who survived her husband Martin Luther King Jr., says veganism was the next logical extension of MLK Jr.'s philosophy of nonviolence.
Absolutely. Where else are you going to go? If you really are espousing nonviolence, we have to be nonviolent to everything in this world, including the animals and the plants and each other.